Hello everyone and welcome to another video. So for this video I'm going to be finally starting my own ranking of all the Doctors, from worst to best. Now just to make things clear, this is of course just my own personal opinion. Also I'll only be ranking the 15 main Doctors, that's Doctors 1 to 13 with the additions of the War and Fugitive Doctors. So I won't be including Doctors like Peter Cushing, the Curse of Fatal Death or Schalke Doctors. I also won't include entities like the Valeyard, Watcher or Dreamlord either. I may end up doing a separate ranking of those at some other point in the near future. Also, we'll be using this tier list created by MikeySpikey18 for the ranking, so credit to them for the list. But anyway, let's dive in with the bottom of the list. 15 and 14. The Fugitive and War Doctors, Joe Martin and John Hurt. So I've put these two at the bottom not because I don't like them, but because I just don't really feel like they've been used all that much. Yes, there have been a number of comics, books and audios released starring the War Doctor, but we still don't know all that much about his life and what he got up to during the Time War. We still have just a few snapshots and hints of the stuff he went through, and we have even less for Joe Martin's Fugitive Doctor. Apart from her two appearances in Series 12 and Fugitive of Jadoon and The Timeless Children respectively, we only have one short story that stars her Doctor. But from what little we do have, I do like both of their Doctors immensely. The War Doctor comes across as a weary old warrior in most of his appearances. He believes himself to be unworthy to be called the Doctor, but is probably one of the most doctorish Doctors of them all due to him continuing to do some good despite everything. The Fugitive Doctor, meanwhile, really does remind me of the classic Doctors, especially William Hartnell and John Pertwee. She's irritable and moody, but still very clearly the Doctor. Yeah, sure, the Timeless Child is hardly the best idea that the show has ever had, but Joe Martin's great talent and performance really do help to convince me with it. And I'm glad that we finally have a person of colour playing the Doctor. Anyway, next up is 13th place. 13. The 12th Doctor, Peter Capaldi. Now before any fans of the 12th Doctor start having a go at me in the comments below, please just hear me out. I'm not saying that 12 is a bad Doctor, on the contrary I think he's really great and brilliant just like all the others. I don't hate him or any of the Doctors as a matter of fact. But I do find his character development to be very messy and sloppy in my personal opinion. Looking at how he is from the start of his era to the end, it honestly feels like I'm looking at 2 or 3 different Doctors rather than the same one. In Series 8, the 12th Doctor was pretty grumpy and sarcastic, something which I still find really refreshing after the quirkiness of the 11th and 10th Doctors. Yes, he did still have some quirks, and he did slowly mellow throughout the course of the series, but it was a very welcome departure from what we'd had in the years immediately preceding his arrival. But then in Series 9 he went the complete other way. I find this very jarring whenever I watch Series 8 and 9 back to back. He became much quirkier and started to wear things like sonic sunglasses and played the guitar like he was trying to be some kind of rock star. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with that approach, it's just such a departure from how he was beforehand. It always takes me a bit of time to adjust to it. Then in Series 10 he sort of became a mix of the previous 2 versions. He retains the shades and guitar, but he was quite moody and sarcastic again. This is probably my favourite version of the 12th Doctor, and I really loved his chemistry and interactions with Bill and Nardole. It is such a shame that the 3 of them didn't get another series together, I think. I do get the sense that maybe 12's character arc wasn't really thought out at some points, and this leads to it feeling very disjointed and confusing at times, in my personal opinion. But I do like the 12th Doctor, and I do feel like Peter Capaldi is one of the best actors to have ever played the Doctor. He is amazing at the speeches his Doctor gives, and you can tell that he has such an enormous amount of passion and enthusiasm in every episode and scene that he's in. Plus, I do feel like his time as a Doctor was way too heavily dominated by Clara, but I'll talk more about my issues with Clara another time. Anyway, next up is 12. The 13th Doctor, Jodie Whittaker. Now again, before any fans of the 13th Doctor start angrily typing in the comments below, please just hear me out. I do like the 13th Doctor an awful lot, and I'm definitely not a not my Doctor sort of person. But I do feel like 13's era has suffered a bit from quite a few limitations that the writers find themselves in. Series 11 had very good intentions, and I do think it was very bold to not have any returning monsters or villains in the vast majority of the series, except for a lone Dalek in Resolution of course. And I do like Graham's little character arc that he goes through throughout the series. His grief and depression after his wife Grace is killed is handled very well in a very moving way at times. And Ryan's gradual acceptance of Graham is very good and well written for the most part too. But Yaz is kind of just left with no real character development beyond the fact that she's a police officer. and that isn't really utilised throughout Series 11 at all, except for introduction. Yes, her meeting a younger version of her grandmother in Demons of the Punjab is clearly designed to give her character more depth and development, but it just feels a little flat, as it isn't really referenced that much in the episodes that come immediately afterwards, and that's the only Series 11 episode that actually focuses on Yaz and feels like a Yaz episode. And as for the 13th Doctor herself, Jodie Whittaker doesn't feel like she's really found herself in a part until Resolution, in my honest opinion. This isn't because she's a bad actor, as she's definitely a great actor and more than capable in the part. The writing just kind of forces her into this pattern of quirks, exposition and quick solutions throughout the majority of the episodes. There isn't much character to her Doctor to begin with beyond the fact that she's quirky and witty, and this is hardly anything new to the overall character of the Doctor. Thankfully, Series 12 does improve on this a little and gives 13 a bit more depth as well as a bit of an edge to her. She's left very clearly angry and devastated at the destruction of Gallifrey at the hands of the Master, and becomes a lot snappier. And her finding out that her life isn't what she thought it was with the whole timeless child thing does also help to add to her Doctor a lot for me. She becomes very unsure of who she is, and that in itself is a fascinating and great place to take a character like the Doctor to. But even after all of that is revealed to her in the Timeless Children, she goes back to her default personality a little in Revolution of the Daleks, and she's only in prison for what seems like all of 5 seconds, even though we know that she's spent at least several decades in her cell. And Yaz does get a bit more development herself in Can You Hear Me with the whole mental health and running away from home thing, but it still just isn't really referenced much in the episodes afterwards, and again just feels a bit flat in my opinion. It does feel like Chibnall and the other writers are trying to do something really interesting and original with 13, Yaz and the others, but for whatever reason it's just not being fully realised right now. Maybe it's to do with the number of episodes and the runtime, or maybe it's something else. But even though I kind of just went on a little rant there, I do feel like the 13th Doctor is really good, and I really do hope that she won't regenerate at the end of Series 13. Like I've said before, it still feels like she's only just arrived, and I hope that Jodie Whittaker is given more time to flesh out her Doctor more, and to really make the part her own. Anyway, next up is 11. The 11th Doctor, Matt Smith. Again, like all of the Doctors, the 11th Doctor is a great and brilliant Doctor, but just like with 12 and 13, I do have some issues with the writing during his era. Things start off well enough with Series 5, which despite some bits not having aged well, is still a great series that I have a lot of fond nostalgic memories of. But then we come to Series 6, and this is when I think Stephen Moffat really starts to make his own distinct impression on the show. The whole River Song and Doctor's death arc was good, but was a little convoluted and overcomplicated for some people. This convoluted nature continued with Series 7 and it became even more confusing for some people. We had the by now tired old formula of the companion being a really special and important person, with Clara's Impossible Girl arc. But the 11th Doctor did at least go through a pretty consistent and coherent character arc, unlike the 12th Doctor, and Matt Smith settled into the part very quickly and was able to make the part very much his own. I do feel like perhaps parts of 11's character and personality did sometimes verge a bit too similar to the 10th Doctor's, maybe, and I do wonder if it was the best idea to have another mainly quirky Doctor so soon after another. But these are just minor gripes of the 11th Doctor, and to be honest, the 11th Doctor still feels like a different Doctor in his own right. The only real issue I have is with the writing, but that's just down to personal taste, of course. It's only natural that whenever a showrunner comes in, they want to do their own way of doing things, rather than what others want them to do. And I think it's important to remember that when looking at not just Stephen Moffat's time on the show, but Chris Chibnall's and Russell T Davies's too, and just the whole of Doctor Who overall. But anyways, we now come to 10th place, and that is 10. The 7th Doctor, Sylvester McCoy. The first classic Doctor we come to on this list, the 7th Doctor, is another great Doctor. Starting off being a buffooning clown, the 7th Doctor gradually becomes a master manipulator who, whilst always meaning well, does like to play chess with the lives of his enemies and even companions. He also believes that the ends justify the means, being one of a very small number of Doctors to believe this. The 7th Doctor therefore can be a little sinister and cunning, even though we know that he is still a Doctor and still tries to help wherever he can. I find all of this to be really fascinating and interesting, and I do quite like the Cartmel master plan, even if, like the Timeless Child, it can be a little controversial among fans in a way. But what stops his Doctor from being any higher on this list is how his Doctor was in his very first season, season 24. He's a very silly and at times annoying Doctor during some parts of that season, and it is somewhat jarring and hard to believe that this clown is the same Doctor as the Master Manipulator. But that's the only negative thing I have to say about the 7th Doctor. So, let's now move on to 9th place. And that is 9. The 8th Doctor, Paul McGann. The 8th Doctor was arguably the unluckiest of all the Doctors, excluding the War and Fugitive Doctors. He never really had that much of his own era on TV, with just a TV movie and minisode acting as his only on-screen adventures. So when Big Finish were able to start using the 8th Doctor in their own audio dramas, they essentially had to develop his entire character and personality, and they definitely succeeded. Paul McGann really owns every audio that his Doctor appears in. His Doctor is charming, funny and witty, growing darker later on after the death of his companion Lucy Miller and great-grandson Alex Campbell. His Doctor has without a doubt become the Doctor of Big Finish audios, probably appearing in more than any other, or thereabouts at least. And he's always a joy to listen to, and I'm really glad that Paul McGann got the chance to really make his own stamp on the character and grow his Doctor. Anyway, next up is 8. The 6th Doctor, Colin Baker. The 6th Doctor is a Doctor who was very badly handled during his time on TV. There were some major disturbances and drama going on behind the scenes, and this really badly affected his era to the point where Colin Baker's time as the Doctor ended before it had even fully begun. Therefore I do feel bad for having his Doctor this low, but that's only because of his Doctor not really fulfilling his full potential on TV. Yes, he's done a lot of Big Finish audios, and whilst I haven't listened to them all yet, the ones I have made me appreciate and love his Doctor so much more. I'm really glad that Big Finish gave Colin Baker the chance to flesh out and fully develop his character, and to show us all just how great his Doctor can be. 7. The 3rd Doctor, John Pertwee. Yes, I know I've probably put the 3rd Doctor a lot further down than others normally would, but please just hear me out here. I don't think the 3rd Doctor is a bad Doctor by any means. I actually really like him, and I think his era is one of the best in the show's entire history. The vast majority of his stories being Earthbound Unit 1s is something that really sets his era apart from the others, and I really love the dynamics that exist between the 3rd Doctor, the Brigadier, Sergeant Benton and Captain Yates, as well as Jo, Liz and Sarah Jane, of course. They all essentially helped create this ensemble feeling, which is something that arguably hasn't happened before or since, or at least not in the same way at all. And even Roger Delgado's Master is essentially included in this ensemble. He is without a doubt the best Master in my opinion, and he is my all-time favourite. I love the chemistry he and Pertwee have, and their Doctor-Master rivalry is so good that I don't think any other has really even come close to truly replicating or improving on it. Because there's no way you can replicate or improve on something as great as their dynamic and rivalry. The only real reason why Pertwee isn't any higher is simply that there are 6 others that I just about prefer over him. But honestly, I love the 3rd Doctor and his era. You can really tell that the main cast loved working together on the show, and I'm not at all surprised that many fans have Pertwee as their favourite Doctor. He may not be mine, but he's not a million miles away from it. Anyway, next up is 6th place. 6. The 5th Doctor, Peter Davison. Unlike the 3rd Doctor, the 5th Doctor is quite an underrated and underappreciated Doctor, I think. The 5th Doctor is probably the first Doctor to feel more human and vulnerable. He's not as easily in control as some of his predecessors, and that's something which I've always found very interesting and fascinating. It can sometimes feel like he loses control of the situation quickly, and has to give his all to regain control and save the day. It's the complete opposite of the Master Manipulator that is the 7th Doctor. He's also the first Doctor to truly think about the consequences of his actions, and he clearly develops slightly more emotional attachments to some of his companions than his predecessors seem to do. In some ways he's a bit like the template that some new series Doctors, such as 10, 11 and 13, have followed and tried to replicate and improve on to arguably varying degrees of success. I do love all of the other Doctors, but I find him to be one of the most interesting and intriguing, as his Doctor goes through such an emotional journey during his era. He loses his companion Adric in Earthshock, and is heartbroken at the end of Warriors of the Deep when a load of Silurians and Sea Devils all die because of him reluctantly having to unleash a gas to kill them. He also threatens to murder Davros in cold blood in Resurrection of the Daleks. He starts off as being quite naive and enthusiastic, but develops into a much more cynical and sarcastic Doctor by the end of his era, and all because of the immense struggle that he has to go through. I can understand that some people find him to be too wet and weak, and therefore don't think of him that highly or positively, but I actually quite like his vulnerability, and I think it serves as a great contrast to so many of the other Doctors. We arguably have too many Doctors that are confident and sure of themselves, so the Fifth Doctor being the total opposite is something which I just find so appealing and in some ways relatable. Anyway, we now come to the final 5. So, let's see who is in 5th place. 5. The First Doctor, William Hartnell. Another Doctor that I feel is hugely underrated and underappreciated. The First Doctor is of course the one that started it all, and what a good job William Hartnell did in starting it. Like the Fifth Doctor, the First Doctor also went on a bit of a journey. He started off as being very nasty and unreasonable, but slowly mellowed and softened, becoming the kind and compassionate grandfather that we all know and love. And this is without a doubt thanks to his human companions, Ian Chesterton and Barbara Wright. Through travelling with them, he really started to sort of see things from their point of view, and slowly started to show his amazement and wanderlust that so many of his successors also had. He really came to care for his numerous companions, and for all life forms overall. As for William Hartnell himself, it's hard for anyone to deny his legacy and involvement in not just bringing life to the Doctor, but to the show itself. I personally think that if it weren't for Hartnell, as well as other people like Verity Lambert, Boris Hussein, Sidney Newman and everyone else involved with the show's creation in early years, there would be no Doctor Who. I was very disappointed with the way the First Doctor was made out to be in Twice Upon a Time. The Doctor has never been sexist or bigoted in any way, no matter which one we're on about. Plus the First Doctor even once made a speech about how he respects all life in Galaxy 4. That's hardly something a sexist or bigoted person would say. I understand that Stephen Moffat wanted to make a point of how the Doctor has grown and changed, but I personally wouldn't have done it the way he did. It's a real shame, I think, because otherwise David Bradley plays him really well, and really captures Hartnell's spirit and mannerisms. I understand also that maybe Moffat wanted to address Hartnell's rumoured bigoted behaviour and remarks, but if any of those stories are true, then that is just the actor, not the character. William Hartnell may have said that stuff, but the First Doctor as a character never did. That is not to say, however, that behaviour is acceptable, as it definitely isn't. But regardless of all of that, I am still a huge fan of the First Doctor, and I think he is a great and brilliant Doctor overall. But let's now move on to 4th place. 4. The 9th Doctor, Christopher Eccleston. Just like William Hartnell's portrayal of the First Doctor helped to launch the show and the overall character of the Doctor, Christopher Eccleston's performance as the 9th Doctor definitely helps to relaunch and modernise both. Eccleston's Doctor is much more down to earth and back to basics than his predecessors. He's not a Doctor who is really eccentric and out there. He's a traumatised survivor of a terrible war who is suffering from a lot of survivor's guilt. Russell T Davies's great writing and Eccleston's talented performance really gel very well together. It's clear that they both had a clear vision of where to take the 9th Doctor. Yes, the 9th Doctor was only around for one series on TV, but during this very brief tenure, the 9th Doctor nevertheless went through a very thought out and developed character arc. Starting out as much more distant and with his survivor's guilt arguably at an all-time high, the 9th Doctor gradually softened and started to relearn how to be the Doctor again. Christopher Eccleston brought a great balance of darkness and grief, but also joy and wit to the part throughout the course of his one series. His Doctor went through a lot more developments in one series than some might arguably do in 3 or 4. The only vaguely negative thing I can say is that I wish we'd had more of him, as do most fans, I'm sure. But Eccleston still brought a lot to the table, and established himself almost so effortlessly and immediately in the role. As I've said before, I started getting into the show as Eccleston was leaving, and I've always had a fondness and love for his Doctor alongside David Tennant's. I'm really glad that he's recently returned to the role for Big Finish, and it's great to see him gradually feel more comfortable talking about his time on the show in recent years. I do feel sorry for him for what he had to go through, but I think it's great how he's in a much happier place nowadays. It would be great if he were to appear alongside the other Doctors for an anniversary special like the 60th one day. I would especially like it if his Doctor and David Tennant's were to meet each other purely because of them being my 2 childhood Doctors growing up, as I said earlier. but I completely understand if he doesn't feel comfortable taking part in such things. But a Ninth Doctor is a great Doctor, and I will always have a soft spot for his Doctor and era. Anyway, next up is 3. The Second Doctor, Patrick Troughton. Another Doctor that I think was very important to the show's overall history and longevity is the Second Doctor, Patrick Troughton. When William Hartnell left the show back in 1966, many people thought that would be it for Doctor Who. But instead, the concept of regeneration was introduced, allowing a new, younger actor to take over from Hartnell. This actor was, of course, Patrick Troughton. Over the following 3 years, Troughton reinvented the character and brought his own vision and talents to the part. Instead of being the grumpy old grandfather that William Hartnell had been, Troughton chose to be a clumsy cosmic hobo. In many ways, the Second Doctor became the polar opposite of the first. He was a lot friendlier and comical. People took him a lot less seriously too, and listened to him a lot later on, normally as well. But the Second Doctor could also be cunning, and often tricked his enemies into thinking he was stupider and less of a threat to them than he really was. He is one of the first classic Doctors that I ever watched, and I've therefore always had a soft spot for him. I especially loved his interactions and bond with Jamie McCrimmon. The two became a real comedic duo together and became a great Doctor and companion pairing. There isn't a single Patrick Troughton story that I don't find enjoyable, or at the very least watchable, except for the Underwater Menace, which was just, well...
Just one small question. Why do you want to blow up the world?
Why? You, a scientist, ask me why? The achievement, my dear Doctor. Nothing in the world can stop me now!
Mad. But anyway, there's my third favourite. We now have just 2 left. So let's see who is at number 2. 2. The Fourth Doctor, Tom Baker. One of the most famous and popular Doctors, the Fourth Doctor is also currently the longest serving Doctor, with Tom Baker playing the part for 7 years, from 1974 to 1981. During this time, Tom Baker definitely left his own mark on the character. An eccentric bohemian with his trademark long multicoloured scarf and bag of jelly babies, the Fourth Doctor easily became one of my all-time favourites as soon as I started watching his episodes. He has since become my favourite classic Doctor, as well as my second favourite Doctor overall, of course. His zany idiosyncrasies and quirks make him stand out from practically every Doctor before or since. Yes, most Doctors, especially the more recent ones, can have a lot of quirks and eccentricities as well, but Tom Baker takes it to a whole new level with his Doctor, and nobody has ever really successfully replicated or beaten his quirks. His Doctor is one that is full of energy, with sometimes dramatic mood swings. He can be a jolly grinning Mad Hatter 1 minute, then serious and solemn the next. He also has some of the best quips and one-liners of all the Doctors, especially during season 17, when the great sci-fi comedy writer Douglas Adams served as the show's script editor. Tom Baker's Doctor suits Adams's bizarre and witty comedy very well, but his more serious side is arguably at its best during his early years, when Philip Hinchcliffe and Robert Holmes were the show's producer and script editor respectively. This suits the gothic horror feel of some of those stories really well, especially with stories like The Seeds of Doom. Tom Baker's era overall feels like it has something for everyone in a way. There's the more serious and horror movie-esque nature of his first 3 years, then there's the more comedic and whimsical feel for the following 3 years, and then finally there's the harder sci-fi and story arc-driven feel of his final year. But anyway, we now have just 1 Doctor left, and you've probably worked out who it is by now. 1. The 10th Doctor, David Tennant. Yes, that's right, David Tennant is my number 1 favourite Doctor. This shouldn't really come as much of a surprise. I have said before of how I grew up with primarily his Doctor as a child, and of the fond nostalgic memories I have of his era, especially Series 4. But I also think that his Doctor is such a fascinating character. Still having some wounds from the Time War, the 10th Doctor could switch a lot between his lighter and darker sides, just like the 4th Doctor. Yes, his whole relationship with Rose Tyler was cringy and melodramatic in some ways, and he was quite rude and nasty towards Martha Jones when she had unrequited feelings for him. But his flaws don't make me hate him, they just make him seem more like an actual person or human being to me, and that's something which I find really endearing and fascinating. Like the Fifth Doctor, the Tenth Doctor could be very human in a way. He wasn't just a flawless alien. He had many flaws and imperfections and could make very big mistakes. A good example of this is him becoming self-proclaimed Time Lord Victorious at the end of the Waters of Mars. He could also be very arrogant and vain, with him often saying things like him being the smartest person in the entire room. He could also be selfish, such as his aforementioned treatment of Martha, and him not wanting to regenerate at the end of time, to the extent that he even kicked up a fuss before saving Wilfred Mott. So yeah, I can completely understand why some people have massive problems with his Doctor, but I think his flaws and faults make him more relatable and fallible. He's not as seemingly flawless and faultless as some of the other Doctors could arguably come across as. He's a lonely traveller in desperate need of someone to see the universe with, and help keep him in line. In a way, without any companions, he's hurting and can't really cope. His supposed confidence and vainness may even be an act, and he may secretly be more unsure and insecure of himself. But that's just my own personal feelings on the matter. I'm not defending his at times shocking behaviour, and the themes of romance and love during his era are not really to my taste, but I can understand what Russell T Davies was trying to do with the 10th Doctor. He was trying to continue making the Doctor seem more like a real person, with real emotions and faults, rather than just an infallible alien that is always in control of a situation and their own feelings. And personally, I think Davies's writing and Tennant's acting really succeeded in helping to bring this across. But that's why David Tennant is my all-time favourite Doctor, and that is also my own ranking of all the 15 main Doctors. Anyway, thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed it. Please don't forget to click that subscribe button below, as well as press the bell icon at the side so you'll be notified of when all my new videos come out. This channel currently has 338 subscribers as of the time of writing and recording this video. But if we're able to get to 350 by the end of this year, then I'll do a Q&A where you can ask me whatever questions you want. And please feel free to tell me what your own ranking of all the Doctors would be, and whether you agree with mine or not. Just keep it polite, please. And if you want to binge watch all of my videos so far, then there is a link to a playlist of all of them in the description box below. So, until next time, bye bye!